corporations to buy our broadcast properties. And, one of the things that the FCC said, well, we're not going to allow these radio and television stations to fall into the hands of bad players, and we're going to vet whoever it is that purchases the radio and TV stations. And I'm thinking, you mean the same people that vetted the Iran nuclear deal?
You and I both know that's all political garbage. You can read through this real quickly. These are sop words that sound really good, but then as soon as you scrutinize it, it's not going to hold up.
And I love how they say, well, our security people will look into it. Well, great. So they're supposed to look into the terror cells that are here in the United States. We're seeing how that's working out. I'm sure they do a great job, but they don't get them all. We know that here being in Central Florida. But then somehow they're going to be able to go to these closed societies like Russia and these Middle Eastern monarchies and communist China, and they're going to follow the money trail in those countries back to the governments that would be funding these things? Come on.
Congress can jump in here and say, no, we're not going to allow that. We're going to deep six this whole decision by the FCC. Any move to do that?
I don't think so. And in fact, in the piece that I wrote for Accuracy in Media, I put a link on the page to the fact that not even 2 weeks prior to the FCC vote on this, there was a Senate hearing where all 5 of the FCC commissioners, by the way, most of whom were either lobbyists or lawyers for the communication industry, they testified for 3 hours before that committee. The entire FCC did. Not one senator brought the issue up. Now, I have 2 senators here from Florida who are on that committee. Senator Nelson was there. He didn't bring it up. And Senator Rubio didn't show up. And I don't know very many political types, very many office holders or wannabe office holders that really want to pick a fight with CBS News or Walt Disney Company. I guess that might explain why there doesn't seem to be much of a concern on their part. It's really sad. And not only is it sad, it's scary.
Well, we are dismantling, I'm doing some math here, we're dismantling about 80 years of established policy in this country. There was a reason why we had this law in the first place, or at least this I can't remember whether it was part of the Communications Act or whether it was subsequently written, and that was to keep foreign powers from influencing what people in the United States heard. That's why it was in place. And that's why it stood for as long as it has. But I don't know if you've noticed it. We are systematically dismantling and end running a whole series of protections. You can look at it in the economic arena, in this arena, and they offer this pablum, like you were talking about, when asked about this or that. Oh, well, we'll have somebody investigate it. You mean like they investigated Mrs. Clinton?
And it's interesting you talk about the law itself, why it was put into place. Well, Commissioner Rosenworcel supposedly addressed that prior to the vote, and she said that these laws were put in place to prevent foreign powers from disrupting ship-to-shore governmental communications during warfare. But she said, as horses and bayonets are not the tools of modern warfare, where have we heard that before? The cyber threats we face today are not especially well guarded by these prohibitions. And it's like, well, wait a minute. This is a false analogy here. One thing that has been made and actually enhanced by modern technology is propaganda. All you have to do is ask any of the ISIS fighters that are over there in the Middle East that were beguiled and taken in by slick videos. I'll tell you, the propaganda that is coming out nowadays is far more sophisticated than anything that was around during World War II. And the problem is that Americans, we are so naive. We buy this stuff hook, line, and sinker. I can't tell you how many people I've heard repeat just stupid things that I've heard on Russia Today. A good example is during the anniversary of the nuclear bomb dropping in Nagasaki, I believe it, or Hiroshima. Russia Today said 70 years ago, America dropped the bomb on the Hiroshima 2 days before the end of World War II. Well, that's really good propaganda, because what they don't tell you is the reason that World War II ended 2 days later was because they dropped the bomb.
We had a guest on recently, a military guest, and he was pointing out how many people we had lost in fights over Iwo Jima and Guadalcanal, and they realized that the next step, remember, we had already ended the war in Europe, and now we were going to have to button this thing up with Japan, that invading the Japanese home islands was going to be a bloodbath of incredible dimensions. We know that the Japanese were ready for it. They were going to fight for every single inch all the way to Tokyo. There was just no will for it. And so it was a choice of, do we do A or do we do B? Either way, a bunch of people were going to die. And so today everybody looks back with this, war protest movement of the 60s mentality and tries to project that back 50 years and say, well, look at that horrible blah, blah, blah. And I go, A-bombs are not great things. But at the time, that was the choice that Truman had to make. And you're right, everything is being distorted historically, but I'm watching this systematic dismantling of protections that exist, and they're shrugging them off like these are not important.
Well, we're so sophisticated nowadays, we think. You have a lot of factors going on here. You have the people, the globalists that don't like borders, and then you just have good old-fashioned greed. You were talking earlier about the laws that used to govern television networks. Well, there was a time, as I recall, the law that said that television networks could not produce all of their own programming. They had to open up their programming to independent producers, and that's how we got all these syndicated programs that came on in the evenings. There was a lot of thought that went into these laws because we had it so that if somebody wanted to be a propagandist in the United States, you could do that, but you had to identify yourself as being a propagandist. And I just find it hard to believe that somebody doesn't really understand the big picture here. And it's kind of like I think Obama had said that interesting things happen in the fourth quarter. Well, we're in the fourth quarter, and we have just given up control of our American airwaves. And most people don't know it. To me, it's one of the darkest days in American history, that vote that had happened. And how you unwind that, I talked to somebody the other day, and they said, well, whoever gets in, if we get one of our guys in, he'll just do an executive order. It doesn't work like that. You don't do an executive order like that. They could unwind it if they wanted to, but then again, they would be fighting these networks the whole way they do it. But if I could just say this, I turned 65 the other day, and I had never thought I would live to witness what I've witnessed in terms of the corruption of our national media. And what this is going to allow is for your local radio and TV stations to be just as corrupt.
And the reason we had, by the way, independent programming was to prevent the networks, which at the time were just three, CBS, ABC, and NBC, from having a monopoly over all of the content every evening of what people saw.
Oh, no, yeah, and that's another part of the coin. But I remember when I filed the complaint with the FCC against the public television station here, the president of the network, Megahertz Network, sent a letter out to all of their affiliates letting them know that this guy named Jerry Kenny from Daytona Beach, Florida, might be contacting you to look at your contract with us to see if you have a clause in that will allow you to preempt this propaganda. I thought that was rather interesting that he was so concerned about one guy who, and by the way, they didn't have to let me look at their public file because I didn't live in their viewing area. You have to live in their viewing area to do it, but they did all of this under the name of academic freedom. And, well, don't you believe in freedom of speech? And I said, well, I believe in freedom of speech, but, why don't you allow an opposing opinion to this? Let's debate this thing. Let's hold this open. You have a constant flow. They basically turned public broadcasting channels into propaganda channels for foreign governments. I think Americans need to wake up. This is something that is happening, kind of behind the scenes, and most people are not paying attention. Last year, when they announced this notice for proposed rulemaking, where they were going to make this decision, where they took the comment period, why that just happened to fall over the Thanksgiving and Christmas holidays. What a coincidence.
Yeah, I know they're staged that way so that people don't notice it. Jerry Kenny, president of Kenny Broadcasting Corporation in Florida. Any closing thoughts on this subject?
I've worked pretty closely with Cliff Kincaid over at Accuracy in Media, and Cliff also has another website, which is usasurvival.org, and we have several articles on that. And I guess the only thought I can leave folks with is please pay attention to this and get involved. I think that it's not just the programming that they'll be airing, it's the programming that they won't air.
What you always have to do with politicians is listen to what they're saying. Remember, what does that mean? How will it be implemented or enforced? Is it voluntary or mandatory? And who will pay for it? And if you start to hear the soppy words coming out, like, oh, well, yeah, we'll have somebody monitor that. And no, it's either yes, it's in, or no, it's out. And they don't want to do either. They want to have this vague floating control. Then you really don't believe what they're saying. Please like us on Facebook. We do have a special Facebook page.